About a year after ChatGPT went mainstream, I sat down for a video call with a student. He was in my graduate online community class. He had handed in an essay that was, frankly, it was terrible. It was so clearly AI generated. But instead of just failing him right away, I decided I'd try something different, a different approach. I told him, look, I'm not taking any points off. You're safe. I just wanted to talk. So I asked him this really simple, open-ended question. Tell me what you were thinking about the specific topic in your paper. And he just froze. He stammered a little, but he had absolutely nothing to say. I waited, gave him some space, but nothing. So I lowered the bar a lot. I asked him about the general area of the course content, broad stroke stuff, the main idea of the whole semester. Again, just silence. He looked genuinely distressed, not because he was caught, I don't think, but because he was being asked to access knowledge that just wasn't there. It wasn't stored in his brain. So I took a deep breath and I lobbed him a complete softball, a basic concept from the very first weeks of class. And that's when it really hit me, the reality of the whole situation. He didn't just struggle with the answer. He was a complete blank slate. He knew nothing about the essay, about the course, about anything. This wasn't just a student taking a shortcut. This was a student who had completely 100% outsourced his intellect. And it is not an isolated incident. I'm seeing this everywhere, from students faking interview data with AI to just a noticeable drop in motivation and critical thought across the board. I'm seeing what they call a bimodal distribution of learning outcomes that I have not seen in 30 years of teaching. We are watching a generation split into two. You have the few who still do the hard work, and then this growing number who are letting algorithms just hollow out their intellectual integrity. The whole situation has become so structurally broken that to fix it, I think we have to do something that feels like stepping back into the 19th century.
That story, it perfectly frames the scale of what's happening, because it shows that we're grappling with something so much bigger than just a few students cheating. This isn't a typical academic integrity scandal. It's not about taking a momentary shortcut. It's a measurable crisis, a profound, quantifiable decay in core cognitive skills across all of higher education. This technology is automating the very thing that makes us learn. The intellectual struggle, the mental resistance, that's what's disappearing.
And it touches every single level, doesn't it?
Every single level, from the top, the administrators making these multi-million-dollar deals with tech companies, all the way down to the individual student who is supposed to be wrestling with their syllabus. Or, maybe more accurately, as your story shows, not wrestling with it at all.
So that's our mission for this deep dive then, to figure out how we got to this point of intellectual outsourcing, and maybe more importantly, how we get out of it. How do we restore some authenticity to education?
Exactly. And I think to do that, we need to unpack three really critical, interconnected dimensions of AI's impact. First, you have the institutional colonization, how universities are, frankly, cynically adopting this tech, often at the expense of their actual mission. Second, we have to look at the integrity crisis that follows. The frightening normalization of cheating that's turning academic fraud into a venture capital ideology. It's bizarre. And third, and this is maybe the most alarming part, we have to look at the severe cognitive toll on the student mind. And we have hard neuroscience on this. And only after we understand those three pillars of decay can we really look at the pedagogical strategies that educators are turning to, which are, kind of surprisingly, the most traditional methods you can imagine. It's all about restoring genuine, measurable learning.
Okay, let's start with that institutional response then, because that's where the money and the contradictions really kick in. I remember when ChatGPT first exploded onto the scene, the initial faculty panic was palpable. There was this sense of dread over plagiarism that felt almost existential. In meetings, I heard immediate calls to go back to old school blue books, handwritten exams, strictly proctored in-person tests. It was almost like a collective desire to just say, okay, the digital world is over, we're done.
And that panic lasted for what, 6 months? Maybe?
If that.
Before the financial realities and the market pressure for innovation set in.
Yeah.
And what followed was the true sign of institutional capture, this immediate, almost jarring about face. The very same professors who were predicting academic doom were suddenly rebranding themselves as AI-ready educators.
I saw that happen in real time.
They were all flooding into these mandatory campus workshops, now with titles like AI Literacy Essentials. It was the most cynical version of, if you can't beat them, join them, just repackaged and sold as some kind of progressive educational leap forward.
And I think the most stunning, the most paradoxical example of this whole embrace has to be the California State University system. CSU, this is America's largest public university system. It serves nearly 500,000 students. And they announced this massive, head-turning $17 million partnership with OpenAI
$17 million.
for free ChatGPT edu licenses. Their whole goal, they proudly announced, was to be the nation's first AI-empowered university.
The CSU OpenAI paradox is just, it's devastating, mostly because of the timing and the context of that announcement. You have this grand corporate-driven tech gesture happening at the exact same moment that the CSU system was proposing these immense systemic cuts.
Staggering cuts.
A staggering $375 million slash to its core budget. This wasn't just minor belt tightening. It was a fundamental restructuring of the entire system.
And when you look at the human cost of that juxtaposition, it just becomes brutal. While you have administrators gushing about these future-focused learning tools from their $17 million deal, specific universities within that system were just being decimated. Sonoma State, for instance, was facing a $24 million deficit.
Right.
And the immediate result was the elimination of 23 entire academic programs.
Not courses. Programs.
Entire programs, including foundational subjects like philosophy, economics, physics. And it led to cutting over 130 faculty positions. More than a quarter of their teaching staff got pink slips.
And this is the absolute crux of the critique. The university is outsourcing its core function. It's what it's doing. They are paying millions of dollars to a private corporation, OpenAI, for a service that many students, let's be honest, were already using for free.
That's the crazy part.
While at the same time, they're declaring they can't afford to pay their longtime human lecturers. So you have to ask, is this really investing in education? Or is it just outsourcing the intellectual process and turning knowledge into another consumable commodity? Which gets to this idea of academic capitalism.
So the goal is no longer intellectual growth, it's market efficiency. And if that's the case, what we're seeing is the full rise of the technopoly. I remember the media theorist Neil Postman talking about this. A society where technological efficiency becomes the only metric of worth. It just replaces any deeper human or educational purpose.
That is the perfect framework for this. A technopoly is what happens when a society, or in this case a university system, just surrenders its ethical and intellectual judgment to whatever technology dictates. Once speed and optimization and this perceived productivity replace things like reflection, critical dialogue, and human mentorship, education just mutates into logistics. And that shift facilitates something even more destructive, something we could call institutional autocannibalism, where the university literally consumes its own core academic identity for some perceived short-term gain.
And we saw that devastating irony play out so clearly at San Francisco State University, which is part of the CSU system. They were promoting these free ChatGPT edu licenses as a sign of progress. Yet at the exact same time, graduate programs that are devoted to critical, human-centric inquiry, programs like women and gender studies and anthropology, were suspended. Why? Lack of funding.
The irony is almost too painful to even talk about. These were the very fields, the humanities, the critical social sciences that are best equipped to study and critique the immense social and ethical impacts of AI.
The ones we need most right now.
The ones we need most. And yet they were deemed expendable, too expensive or not vocational enough. The administration's public messaging became this cynical contradiction. You'd get these emails warning about looming layoffs right alongside these chirpy summer messages about how to maintain your access to corporate productivity tools. So critical pedagogy gets replaced by productivity hacks. Right. That vital struggle of finding your own voice, of articulating a nuanced argument that gets exported to an AI platform that gives you an instant, flat answer. Genuine intellectual struggle is just deemed too expensive of a value proposition, and knowledge gets refashioned as a cheap commodity.
So the university is basically being retrofitted. It's becoming a fulfillment center for cognitive convenience. And the scandal here isn't necessarily that they don't know what's happening. It's the institutional indifference. It feels like as long as the enrollment figures hold steady, they'll just manage the educational wreckage. They'll just trade authenticity for volume.
And the immediate, measurable consequence of that institutional surrender is this widespread integrity crisis, which leads directly to what you could call the cheating AI technology complex. It's a self-perpetuating vicious cycle.
Oh, I have watched this cycle just accelerate over the last 2 years. Universities partner with AI firms for innovation. Then students use that AI to cheat on their assignments. Then the faculty panics about the cheating, and the schools are forced to spend even more money buying AI detection tools from other AI firms.
Exactly.
It really is fighting robots with robots. It's where surveillance capitalism meets institutional malpractice.
And that malpractice gets even deeper when you look at the detection tools themselves. Companies like Turnitin are often deployed system-wide, despite all these documented concerns. For instance, we know there are high rates of false positives, and there's documented bias against work submitted by students who are English as a second language learners or from certain marginalized groups.
Right.
So when universities blindly adopt these tools, they're just replacing the ethical problem of plagiarism with the ethical problem of algorithmic bias. You're just exchanging one form of injustice for another and paying a premium for it.
That brings up a really crucial point of friction then. If the detection tools have these known systemic biases, aren't universities just replacing academic fraud with unequal, algorithmically biased enforcement?
They absolutely are. It turns the academic integrity office into this battleground over technology instead of a conversation about learning. But the ultimate example of marketizing dishonesty came from Perplexity AI.
That was truly unbelievable. Perplexity AI ran a Facebook ad campaign, and it specifically featured a teenage influencer. And this teenager was bragging quite openly about using the app to cheat on every single assignment he had.
It was a shocking moment, truly. The company was literally glamorizing academic fraud as a core selling point. They were framing dishonesty as technological leverage. And this marks a new low, where academic dishonesty moves from being this secret, frowned-upon subculture to a celebrated brand identity, and critically, a venture capital ideology. And that shift redefines the very purpose of education for an entire generation. And I don't think any single figure embodies this venture capital ideology of fraud quite like Chung-In Roy Lee, the entrepreneur of the bullshit degree.
The saga of the bullshit degree entrepreneurs. It perfectly encapsulates our era. So Roy Lee, a Columbia student, publicly admitted to using AI to write 80% of his essays. He was openly cynical about it. He said he wasn't there to learn critical concepts. He was there to find a wife and a startup partner.
Unbelievable.
And when his first cheating app, Interview Coder, got him suspended from Columbia, he just dropped out.
And this is where that venture capital connection really solidifies. Instead of facing consequences, Lee leveraged his notoriety. The fact that he got expelled for promoting a cheating app, he used that to raise a massive $5.3 million in seed funding for his new company, Cluely. And their company tagline is maybe the most chilling statement in this whole crisis. We built Cluely so you never have to think alone again.
That manifesto, it just spells out the normalization of fraud as a business model. They explicitly argue, and I'm quoting here, why memorize facts, write code, or research anything when a language model can do it in seconds? The future won't reward effort, it'll reward leverage. So start cheating. Because when everyone does, no one is.
That last line, when everyone does, no one is.
Yeah.
That is the core of the sociological danger here. We're watching the erosion of professional ethics and competency standards in real time. We're preparing a workforce that's going to enter high-stakes fields, medicine, engineering, law, with a compliance mindset instead of a competency mindset.
Right.
When you outsource your core professional liability, your intellectual judgment, to a chatbot, accountability just vanishes. If something goes wrong, who's responsible? Is it the user who typed the prompt, the model that generated the error, or the institution that certified the user's competency in the first place?
And the most frightening part is that institutions are actively validating this surrender. Ohio State University, for example, announced that using AI would no longer automatically count as an academic integrity violation.
Wow.
They're essentially saying, look, we can't stop it, so we're just going to make it acceptable.
Exactly. And that decision, it just fundamentally destroys the value proposition of a traditional college education. I mean, why would you as a student pay full, often crushing tuition fees, only to potentially not even be taught by a human being and to be allowed to submit work that isn't even yours?
And the hypocrisy isn't just at the institutional level, it gets intensely personal. We all saw that viral case of Ellis Stapleton, a senior at Northeastern University. She caught her business professor, Dr. Rick Arrowwood, in the act. He was forbidding students from using AI, but she discovered he was using ChatGPT to generate his own lecture slides.
Oh, no.
She found a visible prompt embedded right in his presentation. It said, expand on all areas, be more detailed and specific.
That is just, it's profound cynicism. He was demanding intellectual struggle from his students while he was embracing intellectual convenience himself. This kind of institutional and personal dishonesty, it creates this crushing environment of cynicism. It's best described by that old Soviet joke analogy.
I know the one.
They pretend to pay us, and we pretend to work. In The Traitor, let's call it the chatversity. The administrators pretend to educate us, the faculty pretends to teach, and the students pretend to learn. and it creates degrees that are functionally hollow, what the anthropologist David Graeber called bullshit degrees. They signify nothing about actual competence or genuine knowledge.
Okay, so let's move now from the ethical and institutional rot to the actual damage being done to the student mind itself. This brings us to this core concept of cognitive debt. This is the intellectual price that students are paying for the short-term, instant gratification of efficiency.
Cognitive debt is the theory that by habitually outsourcing difficult mental tasks, you're essentially mortgaging your future cognitive fitness for immediate short-term ease. You're borrowing from your future self. Brad Stolberg's analogy here is perfect.
Yeah.
He said relying excessively on AI is like using a forklift at the gym.
I like that.
You go through the motions, you get the output, you get the essay, the code, the plan, but you skip all the resistance. You feel productive, but your muscles, in this case your neural pathways, they just atrophy. Because thinking, just like physical strength, only develops through resistance and struggle.
And this isn't just some theoretical concern about, intellectual laziness. We have some sobering scientific evidence of measurable neural decline. We really need to look closely at that MIT study, Your Brain, on ChatGPT. What did those researchers actually find happening inside the brain when you delegate the hard work?
The results were genuinely alarming. The researchers found that participants using ChatGPT to draft and structure their essays experienced a statistically significant 47% drop in neural connectivity.
47%.
Across key brain regions, the ones linked to memory, language processing, and critical reasoning. In essence, the students' brains were literally working half as hard. The process created what the researchers called a metacognitive mirage. The students felt just as engaged, just as smart, even as the complex neural circuits responsible for actually learning and thinking were just powering down.
Okay, a 47% drop in neural connectivity. That sounds very abstract. Can you give us a real-world translation? What does that decline actually feel like for a student who's heavily reliant on this?
It feels like the inability to connect two different ideas without a prompt. It feels like severe memory loss, which the study backed up. 83% of the heavy AI users, the ones who relied on it for drafting, could not accurately recall the key points or specific arguments from what they had supposedly just written.
83%.
Compare that to only 10% of the students who wrote unaided. The AI had turned thinking itself into a service, into a black box, and the students were failing to internalize the content. They weren't building long-term memory.
And the most concerning part was the long-term finding, right? The active degradation of their capacity.
Precisely. The study tracked these participants over several months. After 4 months of habitual reliance on generative AI, when they took the tool away, those participants wrote worse than they had at the very start of the study, and certainly worse than their peers who had never used it. Their capacity to structure, organize, and synthesize their own thoughts had actively degraded through disuse.
And we're seeing that quantitative data corroborated across different disciplines as well. A separate study quantified this decline in assessment scores. They found that students who frequently relied on AI, and they defined that as using it for 5 or more hours a week, they scored 17.3 percentage points lower on standardized critical thinking assessments compared to their low-usage peers.
17 points. It's almost 2 full letter grades.
And that cognitive decline wasn't uniform across the curriculum, was it?
No, and this part is fascinating. The data shows that humanities students showed the sharpest cognitive drops.
Why is that?
Well, because AI excels at providing synthesized, objective, generalized answers. Humanities fields, philosophy, literature, history, they require deep interpretation, nuance, ethical ambiguity, and critical subjectivity. AI just flattens all of those complex interpretive opportunities. It turns nuanced critique into a standard, repeatable outcome. The necessary struggle is just gone.
And beyond critical thinking, memory retention suffered too, even in just basic study tasks. Students who used AI-generated summaries for studying recalled 22% fewer concepts from course materials a week later than those who created their own notes.
And qualitatively, this translates into something we're now calling solution paralysis. This is the inability or just this deep inertia to even begin problem solving without immediately resorting to the technology. The cognitive muscles you need to form a starting hypothesis, to identify the steps of an argument, or to brainstorm an outline, they're simply dormant.
That makes me think of that group of marketing students, the story about the milk. They were asked to come up with a novel campaign concept, and the AI output suggested, almost randomly, that milk was superior to water for hydration.
And that anecdote is just a perfect terrifying microcosm of this judgment deficit. The students accepted the AI's bizarre premise, not because they were gullible, but because they had lost the ability to apply basic, verified reality checks. They failed not because they weren't creative in their prompting, but because they had become fluent in generating patterns while becoming fundamentally illiterate in human judgment. The failure to question the input, that is the ultimate cognitive atrophy that we were all worried about.
So we've established the institutional crisis, the integrity crisis, and this deep cognitive crisis. Now we absolutely need to shift gears and focus entirely on the solution. How do educators and institutions fight back against this powerful automation of thought and restore genuine learning?
The foundational shift has to happen in assessment design. It just has to. Traditional assessments, basic multiple choice quizzes or a standard 5-paragraph essay, they target lower order thinking skills, just remembering or understanding content. And that's exactly what AI can replicate in seconds. We have to pivot away from that entirely.
Which means assessments must focus squarely on higher order skills: analyzing, evaluating, and creating. They have to require the kind of human authenticity, critical judgment, and contextual knowledge that AI still struggles to mimic.
And that focus drives our first core strategy, which is to shift the emphasis from process to product.
From product to process, you mean?
Oh, sorry, yes, from product to process, thank you. If we evaluate the steps and strategies students use to arrive at an answer, rather than just grading the final outcome, it makes outsourcing the intellectual work exponentially more difficult. Outsourcing the final product is a simple copy-paste job, but outsourcing the documented struggle, the revisions, the rationale, that's virtually impossible.
So what are the practical, measurable ways faculty can implement this focus on process, especially in, a huge lecture class?
There are several good methods. One is using assessment environments like Cadmus. It's an online platform that tracks the students' digital audit trail, from their initial planning and research all the way through to the final submission. It records how much time was spent drafting versus researching, where they used external resources. But beyond technology, faculty can require detailed structured process notebooks or self-reflection journals at various stages of a project. The student has to document the why. Why did you choose this source? Why did you reject that argument? How did your thinking evolve? This forces a metacognitive engagement that pure AI output just cannot fake.
That structural approach leads us directly to the second and I think most dramatic shift. And this is the one that feels like that jump back to the 19th century, the return of the viva voce, real-time oral interviews and defenses.
This technique is proving to be the essential anti-AI authenticity check. It just is. Oral interviews force students to articulate and defend their reasoning in real time under pressure. And this is minimally vulnerable to AI cheating, because an AI cannot generate spontaneous, adaptive, and nuanced answers on behalf of a human being in a live conversation.
But how can a professor manage this? A viva voce used to be something reserved for like a PhD defense. How do you scale that to a lecture hall of 150 students?
You shift the focus and you shift the stakes. They don't have to be these high-stakes, hour-long interrogations. They can be integrated as low-stakes, 5-minute scenario-based interviews right after a paper is submitted. You could use group interviews or even peer assessment strategies. For instance, in a large management class, you could have paired interviews where students have to jointly explain the steps for a practical skill or apply a theory to a new scenario. The goal is simple: test their ability to apply judgment, not just recall text.
And this necessity is perfectly illustrated in that story of Liam, the 4.0 GPA student we talked about, who was an expert in prompt engineering.
Exactly. Liam had mastered the art of leveraging AI to produce these perfectly structured, well-cited, high-scoring papers. He had a 4.0. He walked into his final 20-minute oral defense, totally confident that his memorized AI summaries would be enough. But the professor didn't ask him to summarize his paper. She said, "Liam, in your midterm brief, you argued for policy X. That policy relies on an assumption of fixed consumer behavior. How would your argument hold up if we applied the counter-arguments from that 1998 ethnographic study we discussed in week 4?
And he was instantly exposed.
He froze. Completely. He hadn't actually read the 1998 study. The AI had only synthesized its existence for him. He lacked the relational knowledge, the human capacity to connect disparate facts and apply a counter-argument to a specific, unique context. His whole veneer of competency just shattered, because he could not generate an informed, critical thought in real time without his digital crutch. The viva voce proves you're testing the authenticity of the mind behind the paper.
Okay, moving on to strategy 3. Nested, staged, and authentic assignments. This seems geared towards structuring the whole learning journey, to prevent that one-and-done cheating attempt.
It's all about sequencing and complexity. You break these large projects into smaller, distinct steps, and you provide specific, individualized feedback at each stage. So if a student tries to generate the final product early using AI, it becomes immediately obvious when they lack the preparatory work, or if they fail to integrate this specific feedback you provided earlier. It forces them to earn their way to the final submission.
And the authentic element there is what truly challenges the generic AI output.
Precisely. You have to make the assignments highly contextual or personal. Require students to reference specific recent class discussions or current local events that happened yesterday, or their own personal life experiences, like in that global intersection subject. And AI can generate a perfect generic essay on global supply chains. But it can't reference the unique logistical problem facing the local port that you talked about in Thursday's discussion. Or it can't reference the unique object you selected from your local environment for your reflection task. In a sustainable commerce course, for example, students complete a nested series, an early individual essay, which then informs a group activity using specific corporate data, which then leads to a final business report. And it's all completed using transparent tracking platforms. That multi-layered context is impossible for a single LLM prompt to satisfy.
That brings us to strategy 4, which requires a shift away from just writing things. Diversify assessment formats, multimodal.
Yes. We have been overly reliant on the written essay for so long because it's easy to grade, it's easy to scale, but written text is what AI excels at, so we have to move beyond it. We have to embrace multimodal formats. Students can shift from written text to creating video logs or vlogs where they explain a complex theory. They can develop a short podcast where they role-play an interview between two historical figures, or create Pechakucha presentations, which demand visual synthesis and brevity, or build e-portfolios that combine images, video, and short reflective captions.
Why are these formats more AI resistant?
Because they demand oral communication, visual literacy, emotional expression, and physical presence things generative AI cannot yet replicate convincingly. They encourage creativity and the development of communication skills while actively challenging the text-generating algorithms. It forces the student to translate a concept into a human-mediated format, which makes the assessment authentic to how we actually communicate today, rather than being stuck in a 19th century paper format.
Okay, finally, none of these pedagogical shifts, the viva voce, the nested assignments, none of them will scale or succeed without institutional support. So we need to talk about the policy and training imperative.
Absolutely. Detection tools alone, as we noted, are insufficient. They're ethically complicated, and their effectiveness is questionable at best. The foundation must be a comprehensive policy framework across the entire university that heavily prioritizes ethical AI usage and policy development. And training, for educators and crucially for students, needs to move beyond simple don't cheat warnings.
So what does that productive training actually look like?
It has to focus on two main concepts. First, strategic scaffolding. Let the students attempt the difficult generative task first. Let them brainstorm, outline, write a rough draft on their own. And then you introduce AI as a tool for critique, refinement, or editing. Second, we need what are called metacognitive wrappers. These are guided reflections where students explicitly compare their own human-generated work to the AI output. They analyze the differences in nuance, depth, and voice. This ensures mindful, rather than habitual, dependence. The goal is to teach them how to use the tool responsibly to augment their thinking, rather than just allowing them to become passively dependent, which is what leads to the cognitive atrophy. So we've established that the stakes in this battle they're extremely high. The intellectual mission of the university is truly at stake. We're risking the widespread creation of those bullshit degrees that signify nothing about actual competency, knowledge, or the capacity for critical judgment.
But the resistance is strong. And it's often being led by the students and the critical faculty who are pointing out the fundamental con here. They are paying for high-quality, authentic learning, for mentorship, for a certification of competence, not for automated convenience or some privatized imitation of education that only certifies they know how to prompt an algorithm.
And the measurable evidence of cognitive decline just refutes that simplistic narrative that AI is an unmitigated good for education. It is, in fact, a cognitive and ethical solvent if it's left unchecked.
The final analysis, then, is that the choice is stark. It's stark for students and for institutions. It's between embracing automated imitation, the intellectual equivalent of that forklift at the gym, and choosing genuine intellectual struggle. The future labor market doesn't need humans who are fluent in generating average text. It needs humans who possess robust judgment, who can synthesize novel information, and who can act as editors of reality. And these are the very skills that are actively destroyed by this chronic, uncritical over-reliance on generative AI. The battle for the future of education is, fundamentally, the battle for the integrity of the human mind.